Linguistics is the scientific study of language. Language is the object of study for a linguist, and the formal study of language dates back to 300 BC. The kinds of approaches and goals of study then were at odds with current trends. A critical turning point in the history of linguistics took place at the end of 18th century when William Jones suggested that there was a historical connection between Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin. This paved the beginning of comparative linguistics. Comparative linguists, they looked for similarities between languages as they suspected the existence of a common mother language from which all these languages in the world might have evolved through centuries.
Historical linguistics seems to be heavily influenced by this trend. Linguistics went on to reconstructing the family tree of the Indo-European languages by comparing the modern languages with each other. Also note that it was the period when Darwin's theory of evolution got widespread acceptance, and evolutionary approaches became the dominant theoretical perspective among the scientific community. By then it had become evident that most of the European languages and West Asian languages are descendants of a common mother language. They came up with the most celebrated laws like Grimm's law and Werner's law to account for these relations. Towards the end of the century, they were replaced by new grammarians. New grammarians were dialectologists, and their focus was on contemporary languages, whereas the comparativists focused largely on dead languages. With the work Course in General Linguistics, Ferdinand de Saussure prepared the way for structural linguistics. Saussure redefined the field by drawing a line separating the diachronic and synchronic studies. Saussure turned their attention from the historical and diachronic study to the synchronic analysis of languages. The dominant philosophy of the time among the scientific community was empiricism, and linguistics was no exception. Linguists following this shifted their focus from peripheral issues to the systems underlying speech. In the United States, these developments led linguists to pay far more attention to the indigenous languages of the Americas. The towering figures of American structuralism are Sapir and Bloomfield. Franz Boas, who is considered as the father of American linguistics and who was also Sapir's teacher, set the field to appreciate the immense diversity of languages. Some linguists, notably Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee Horff, stressed on the influence of language on the thought pattern of people.
Leonard Bloomfield nourished the field with his methodological approach, thus adding a flavor of science into linguistics. Before Bloomfield, American linguistics was more of psychology and anthropology. It was Bloomfield who disentangled linguistics from the clutches of psychology. Linguistics in America at that time was dominated by behaviorist thinking. That is, it was considered unscientific to posit mental entities or states to account for human behavior. Everything was supposed to be described in terms of correlations between stimuli and responses. The legacy of Bloomfield was continued by Bernard Bloch, Charles F. Hockett, and Zelling Harris, and many others.
Bloomfieldian linguistics was against the notion of mixing the linguistic levels like phonology, phonetics, syntax, and others, while other Bloomfieldians were concerned only about phonemes and morphemes. Harris tried to polish the Bloomfieldian paradigm by extending the linguistic analysis to syntax or sentences. This is how he came up with the approach called the immediate constituent analysis. The goals of linguistic research have been forced to reconsider with the entry of Noam Chomsky into the field in early 1950s. His initial propositions seem to be a continuation of the works of his teacher Zelling Harris, and so his ideas were accepted in the field without much difficulty.
He gave a formal structure for grammatical description by his work Syntactic Structures in 1957 and rang the death knell of behaviorism with his review of B.F. Skinner's book Verbal Behavior. He put forward this question, which became quite central to the linguistic research in the years to follow. What does indeed a person know if he knows a language? Chomsky, 1957. He revolutionized the field of linguistics with his proposal about biological basis of human linguistic abilities and continues to be the dominant figure in linguistics till date. General notions. Philology. Philology is the study of languages in written historical sources.
Philologists determine various aspects of the history of a language. From the information available in the documents that are written in the language, this term was also used to refer to historical linguistics before 20th century. Written documents are good sources of linguistic information since they document the sound changes, help to understand the changes and developments in orthography, helps in identifying the borrowed words in that particular language, and so on. It was believed that historical and comparative study of languages was impossible without written documents of earlier stages of the same or related languages. Bloomfield negated this with proofs and freed historical linguistics from the clutches of superstitious notion regarding relation between language reconstruction and written documents.
And thus, philology came to be used as a term contrasting with linguistics after Saussure. Writing system. Writing system is a symbolic system used to represent elements or statements expressible in a language. It preserves features that were the characteristics of a language at a point of time. It undergoes change in a relatively slow pace. Writing systems require characters individually, scripts collectively, and orthography, that is the set of rules and conventions and physical means representing the symbols. Some concepts to be remembered are thusly text. Text is the individual product of writing.
Another is grapheme. Graphemes are the atomic units of a writing system. This is equivalent to the concept of phoneme in speech. Another term is allograph. Allographs are the variants of a grapheme. It is similar to the notion of allophones, for example, cursive, block, and so on. Now, classification of writing system. First is logographic. In logographic writing systems, visual symbols are employed to represent a morpheme or word. No natural language is purely logographic. However, Chinese has a logographic system, but not purely. Such systems use either of the following, that is, pictograms or ideograms. Now tell me about those.
So, correct. Pictograms or ideograms, that's what logographic writing system uses. Pictograms are the pictorial representation of morphemes. Ideograms, they represent a concept or an idea directly rather than representing words or morphemes. For example, ideograms, what are those traffic signal signs? After logographic The second is syllabic classification of the writing system. So in the syllabic system, each character represents a syllable. For example, the writing system of Japanese, that's a syllabic system. After syllabic, the third type is alphabetic or segmental. Tell me about that.
Alphabetic or segmental. So alphabetic system has a set of standard symbols or letters or graphemes that are used to represent the phonemes of a spoken language. True alphabetic system has graphemes of vowels and consonants. For example, the Latin alphabets. After alphabetic or segmental, we have abugida or alpha syllabary. It is a segmental or alphabetic writing system in which consonant-vowel sequences are written as a single unit. For example, in Malayalam, so that's abugida or alpha syllabary. After that, we have abjad writing system. So the writing system which lacks the representation for vowels is called abjad. For example, the Arabic language.
Kanji are the logographic Chinese characters that are being used in modern Japanese writing system. Pinyin is the official phonetic system for transcribing Mandarin pronunciation of the Chinese characters into Latin alphabets. Kana are the syllabic Japanese scripts. Now, talking about the Daniel's classification of writing systems. So, the first type is logographic, and each symbol represents a morpheme in the logographic system of writing, for example, Chinese language. The next type is syllabic, where each symbol represents a syllable, for example, Japanese, kana. The next is alphabetic writing system, where each symbol represents a phoneme, that is a consonant or a vowel, for example, the Latin alphabets. Tell me others.
So the next type is abjad writing system. In abjad, each symbol represents a phoneme. Phoneme, for example, consonant. It only represents the consonant, it does not represent vowels. In the alphabetic, it represents, the symbol represents a consonant or a vowel. In abjad, it's not the case. For example, the Arabic language. And the other classification of Daniel is abugida, which represents phoneme, and that phoneme includes consonants and vowels in the same symbol. For example, Indian languages like Malayalam. Other classification of Daniel's writing system is the featural writing system, which represents, so each symbol in the featural writing system represents phonetic feature like Korean.
Now, synchronic versus diachronic analysis. So synchronic analysis studies linguistic phenomena of a particular time, while the diachronic study views linguistic phenomena in terms of its development through time. The latter was the major concern of traditional linguistics. The latter, that is diachronic analysis, was the major concern of the traditional linguistics. This distinction was introduced by Ferdinand de Saussure and thus laid the foundation of modern linguistics. Now, talking about Long and Pajol. So, this is another distinction that was proposed by Saussure. Long describes the social impersonal phenomena of languages as a system of signs. Social impersonal phenomena of languages as a system of signs, that's Long. Whereas
so Long represents the social impersonal phenomena of languages as a writing system of signs. So Long and Pajol now. This was the distinction introduced by Saussure, where long is the social impersonal phenomena of languages as a system of signs, whereas Pajol describes the individual personal phenomena of language as a series of speech acts. Individual personal phenomena of language as a series of speech acts. That's the whole. Talking about semiotics now. Semiotics is the study of signs. You know, sign as in something that represents something, that kind of sign. Where signs are defined as anything that stands for something else.
Yeah, right, that's true. Words are also signs. Sign language uses manual communication and body language to convey the meanings. For example, shereens. This shereen is a term in sign language that is equivalent to phonemes in spoken language. As in any other discipline, there are two approaches to semiotics also: dyadic approach and triadic approach. The dyadic approach of signs tells that Ferdinand de Saussure proposed that language is made up of sign, and every sign has two parts whose relation with each other is arbitrary. These two parts are called signifier and signified. Signifier means signifiant and signified means signifié.
Yeah, right. Signifiant or signifier means something like a word that is out there in the external world. That's signifier or signifiant. And signified is the mental image of that, that sign. For example, tree is signifier, and the mental image of the tree in the mind is signified. So signifié is the signified, and this system is called the two-side model of sign. Triadic signs now. So this approach was proposed by Charles Sanders Peirce. It considers signs as having three parts. Now tell me about that.
You're right. Triadic system was given by Charles Sanders Peirce, and signs here is of three types: icon, index, and symbol. Icon are patterns that physically resemble what it stands for. For example, a small square picture of a printer is an icon of the print function, or the male female toilets have signs, so that's icon. Index, however, is the sign that denotes its object by virtue of an actual connection that involves them, most often defined by some sensory features. For example, the picture of a skull denotes danger, or if you go to a mall, you see two people dressed in a fashionable way.
Yeah, that's right. That's index. For example, the picture of an actual skull denotes danger. Now, symbols. A symbol is an object. A symbol and the object it denotes do not have any virtual connection, though it is interpreted as the object. Words, for example, are symbols as the sequence of letters that forms the word, and the object it denotes are in an arbitrary relation. Now, communication functions of language. So, influenced by Carl Buechler's organon model, Roman Jacobson identified 6 communication functions of language. Tell me about that.
Correct. Roman Jacobson, who was influenced by the organon model of Carl Buechler, he identified 6 communication functions. The 3 functions that he gave, that is expressive, referential, and conative function, were also enlisted in the organon model. Jacobson's 6 functions of language, which were first appeared in his work Closing Statements, Linguistics and Poetics,
in the year 1960 are the following. So the first is referential function. Referential function denotes the use of language to describe a situation, object, or mental state. It corresponds to the factor of context. The second is expressive, emotive, or affective function. Tell me about that function.
The expressive function, emotive or affective function, it relates to the addressor or the sender and is best exemplified by interjections and other sound changes. The third function was the conative function. Conative is also called the vocative or imperative function. It engages the addressee or the listener directly. The conative function engages the addressee directly. The next function is poetic function. Poetic function is also called aesthetic function. It focuses on the message for its own sake. The next function is phatic function, which implies the use of language for the sake of interaction, like greeting, checking channel working, etc., and therefore is associated with contact factor.
The sixth and the last function is the metalingual function. Metalingual function is also called reflexive function. Metalingual or reflexive function. It is the use of language to discuss or describe itself, like checking code working. So that's the metalingual or reflexive function. Now let's talk about the design features of language. So Charles F. Hockett proposed that human language has 16 features that differentiate language from any other communication systems. It differentiates human language from the communication system used by animals or humans. So animal versus human. That was the contribution of Charles F. Hockett by his work, Design Features of Language. Tell me about that.
The first design feature was vocal auditory channel. This feature emphasizes the fact that spoken language is produced in the vocal tract and transmitted as sound, which then is received by the auditory tract. The second design feature is the broadcast transmission and directional reception. The audible sound is heard in all the directions, but listeners interpret it as coming from one specific direction. Next design feature is the rapid fading. This feature points to the fact that sounds made in speech diminishes quickly after being released. The next design feature is interchangeability.
I'll tell you about interchangeability. So the speakers have the ability to receive and also send the message. That's interchangeability. The next design feature is total feedback. Total feedback here, individuals are able to hear and internalize the message that they have sent. That's the total feedback function or design feature. Next is semanticity. So semanticity design feature says that the speech sounds can be linked to specific meanings. Then comes the arbitrariness design feature. It indicates that there is no one-to-one connection between the signal and its meaning. The next is discreteness design feature. Tell me about that.
It says that each unit of communication can be separated and is unmistakable. That's the discreteness design feature. The next design feature is specialization. What do we call it? It's the same. Specialization. So it says that the speech is produced chiefly for communication. The next design feature is displacement. Displacement talks about the ability to speak about things that are not physically present in the current context. Next design feature is productivity. Productivity denotes the ability to create new messages by combining the already existing signs. That's productivity design feature. Tell me about the traditional transmission design feature.
So this says that it specifies the features that language learning occurs in a social group, the traditional transmission design feature. The next design feature is duality of patterning or double articulation, as there are two names to this design feature, that is double articulation. Double articulation also means the duality of patterning. It says that meaningful signs are made up of meaningless parts. A finite number of meaningless parts are combined to make a potentially infinite number of meaningful utterances. The next design feature is prevarication. This feature is very much peculiar to human language. Prevarication indicates the ability to make false statements. Now tell me about the design features of reflexiveness and learnability.
Well, reflexiveness design feature says that language can be used to refer to itself. Reflexiveness. That's what metalingual is. The reflexive function, metalingual function, and learnability design feature talks about the speakers of one language can learn to speak another language. That's learnability design feature.